All right, good afternoon. This is the civics lecture for Wednesday, May 7th, or 6th, I'm sorry, Wednesday, May 6th. So getting this out a little bit late, I apologize, kind of getting back into the swing of things out here in Pennsylvania. It was great to see everybody, I guess, at least through the eyes of Michigan over the last couple of days. Hope you guys are hanging in there. So today we're going to be looking at really kind of a fresh look at presidential campaigns and elections. Thought we would use this kind of as an opportunity to kind of do a case study of both 2016 and 2020, kind of where things stand in terms of how do you go about winning a presidential election. So one of the things that you should be understanding by now is that there are kind of two phases of any election in terms of how you win an office. Is that first you've got to get the party's nomination. So that allows you to run for the office, but winning the nomination doesn't give you the office. It just gives you the opportunity to get that endorsement from the political party that you are affiliated with in order to actually try to win the office in the general election. And general elections in America take place the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. And that's pretty much the way it has been really since the beginning of our country's history. There are probably a few elections in the early part of the Republic where they might have not taken place in November. The reason for November is pretty actually straightforward. We were an agricultural society in terms of most people earning a living through that kind of means. And you didn't want to have an election when people weren't going to be able to attend. And so, you know, in the spring, you're planting, and in the fall, you're harvesting. So the November was after the harvest, but also before it got too cold and too difficult to travel and move around. So when farmers would come into the towns to sell their crop, things of that nature, and then to buy certain foods, certain stuff, consumer items for the winter, they were in town, so they would end up voting. So that's why you have the general election in November. In terms of the primaries and caucuses, these are contests, these are elections, but they determine the nomination from a political party. They have, really, this is more of a modern phenomenon because before really the 20th century, parties used conventions to determine candidates for running for office. And it was much more of and we talked about this with political parties, it was much more a closed process where the leadership of the political party would make the decisions about who would end up getting to the opportunity to run. And really up until the early part of the 20th century, political parties dominated that nominating process. And especially for offices for Congress, for example, the parties would rotate candidates in and out of those offices. The idea was not to have somebody serve for a long period of time because it was two things. One, they wanted to share the wealth, so to speak, to distribute office holding to a variety of different people, to keep the brand kind of fresh, and also to keep support. The other reality was that service in Washington, D.C. was thought to be something that was almost like a public service, and living was hard. It was kind of a dirty, smelly, hot city. Most people couldn't wait to get out of it. And so it was almost like you would you would kind of perform your dues, pay your dues to serve in Washington. Now, after World War II, tenure for members of Congress really shoot up. So the average tenure before World War II was, maybe 4 years, 2 or 3 terms at the most. Obviously, for a senator, it might be a little bit longer because this term is 6 years. But no more than 2 terms for a senator, and no more than 2 or 3 terms for a House member on average. You did have longstanding members of Congress even before that, but the by and large, most people, it was a temporary service. Now, service in state office, state legislature, state senator, state house, governor, those tended to be a little bit long serving. And another thing, this is a little bit off subject, but service in Congress, it was more considered almost like a part-time job. The pay was low. And so most people who could afford a part-time job like that were people who are either independently wealthy or had professions that they could kind of have determined for themselves how much they would work. So maybe a lawyer who would have clients, and you could do that, and then maybe go to Washington D.C. for a few months out of the year, and then come back home. It also has to do with the fact that up until the early 1900s, most taxes were raised at the state level and local level, and so the action was in state and local government, not Washington D.C. That has completely changed in terms of that. But anyway, the primaries and caucuses, particularly for the presidential contest that we have today, they occur in the winter and spring before the November election. And because it's an every 4-year process for the presidency, they are even number years. So, we're on a 4-year cycle. And of course, 2020 is just like 1920, just like 1820, are presidential election years. And with that, one major difference, obviously, between presidential elections and non-presidential elections, meaning off-year elections when the presidency is not up for grabs. Members of the House are up every 2 years, and members of the Senate, a third of them are up every 2 years because it's staggered elections. Turnout for presidential elections is much higher than in non-presidential years, or what we call midterm elections or off-year elections. And so, depending on when you're up, sometimes the type of people who vote in congressional elections, off-year congressional elections, midterm elections, there's fewer of them, and they tend to be a little bit more consistent voters, ideological voters who have maybe a little bit more educated in terms of what the issues are. Whereas when you get the presidential campaign, they're going to attract maybe a different type of voter, a voter that might be more motivated by personality issues and emotion, as opposed to maybe kind of rationality. And so that really affects who wins and who loses, and how you would strategize in terms of doing outreach to win a particular election. So we're going to look at I talked a little bit about this in the last lecture. We're going to look at the nominating process a little bit more detailed. I'm going to start to share the screen in a moment, show you some contests that from recent presidential campaigns to give you an idea of just kind of how this whole system works. So the presidential nominating process has become one of the major trends is that it's increasingly expensive to run for president. It's also something, because it's expensive, you got to decide to run for presidency almost 2 years before the presidential election of the year that you're trying to win. And so that means in 2020, if you were a Democrat looking to challenge President Trump, you were looking at about 2018 to decide whether you were going to run for office. Now, somebody like Joe Biden, who was actually, I think we're seeing this, I think he was probably looking forward to retirement. And it just so happened that the Democrats really didn't have a deep bench this year. And so they were really struggling to find candidates with some experience. And so they kind of coaxed Biden to come out of retirement in the fall of 2019, which really is a very, very late start, depending, compared to what has been going on the last 20 to 30 years. And one of the reasons why you have to start so early these days is that the primary calendar, and I'm going to talk about the calendar quite a lot today, the calendar has become front-loaded, which means that there are more and more contests that are happening in January, February, and early March of a presidential year, as opposed to before, really starting in the 1960s and moving forward. A lot of these primaries and caucuses, which are kind of these nominating contests to determine who wins delegates, more on that in a second, they were more spread out over the calendar. So if you think about the first 6 months of a year from January to June, you you would have had contests that were not just all, 30 of them before, April 1st. You would have had them spread out really all the way into June. I think California's primary for a long, long time was the last one, and it was the second week of June. Okay, that is not the case anymore. So if the contests are earlier and earlier, meaning primaries and caucuses, that means you got to start early and earlier to kind of get ready. And one of the things that has been happening really is, I think, I would say probably since the 2000s, is that you get presidential nominating debates in the year. I mean, we're talking like the summer of the year before the election. So in this case, you had presidential debates within the Democratic Party in the summer of 2019. That is more than 12 months before the election for president this time around. And so that just gives you an indication of just how much. And so if you're running debates and you're traveling from place to place, then you got to raise money in order to fulfill those. And if you want to, you're going to start running campaign commercials in the summer before the whole year before the presidential election. So that takes money, it takes resources, it takes organization. And so it is a marathon, if you think about it. The difference between a presidential system and a parliamentary system, and I actually think I would prefer this, that you don't really know when the next election is. Let's say you're in Spain or England or something like that, because it's not calendar based. They're called kind of snap elections. There are certain limits in terms of how often you have to have an election. Like you can't go, I think in England, you can't go more than 5 years without an election. But you could have an election in 2019 and decide in 2021 to have another one. And because the parliament elects the national leader, the prime minister, and not the people, basically all you're doing is you're holding congressional or legislative elections. So there's really you're not running for governor or something like that. Now in Germany, they do have governors, and Canada, because they are a federal system. But a lot of parliamentary models, there are no regional leaders in that sense. It's really all centralized at in the national government of a particular country. In America, we know every 2, every 4, and then for senators, maybe every 6 years, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, we're having elections. Okay, so that's kind of how it's worked. So the calendar is very important in terms of understanding how this nominating process works. The other thing you need to know is that to win the nomination for presidency for either major political party, you have to win a majority of the delegates. And so depending upon whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, this is a rough number. And actually, when I show the screen, we might actually get a more precise number. But it's a little bit over 4,000 delegates that are selected by the Democratic Party, and a little bit over 2,000 delegates that are selected in the Republican Party. And so unlike a general election where it's just votes, you win delegates. You actually win human beings. And the way you win human beings who are going to that convention hall in the summer before November, and they're going to pick a nominee. But because the delegates themselves are being picked through a process of voting, whether it's in a primary or a caucus, on the first ballot for both the Republicans and the Democrats, those convention delegates are bound to vote the way their state or their district or their community voted. And each state, actually, the state Democratic Party and the state Republican Party of each particular state has their own rules about how they select delegates. And some of them are through voting. Some of them are through appointment. Some of them are reserved for office holders. The Democrats call them superdelegates. So it's very, very Byzantine in terms of how all this works. And so it's a combination of appointment and election, selection and election. But regardless of the rules, and each party has a different kind of way of allocating delegates, depending upon the outcome of a particular primary or caucus. The name of the game at the nominating stage is to win delegates who on the first ballot are bound to vote in the way that the party of that state determines is the way they do it. Now, after the first ballot, if there is no majority of delegates behind one candidate, and when we say candidate, we're talking a team. And so by the time you get to the convention, what happens is that the candidates who are leading in the race, they will say, I want to pick so-and-so to be my running mate, my vice presidential running mate. And that has become the prerogative of the candidates themselves who are trying to win the nomination. That's one of the first decisions they make, almost like as the nominee for the party. It's like, I want this person to be my vice president. And so when you're talking about the nominating process, you're not having people, you're not having separate contests to be the Democratic nominee for president and then another contest for the Democratic nominee for vice president. Both parties have allowed the nominee for president to make that selection. And of course, they're consulting with party leaders in order to do that. But then it'll be up to the delegates to approve that selection at the convention itself, okay? So winning a majority of delegates is the way you do it. But the Republicans and the Democrats do it very, very differently, and we'll get to that in a second. Now, there are different types of primaries. And the major differences are open primaries and closed primaries. So an open primary, and Wisconsin is the classic example of this. Most states don't have open primaries, but some do. Wisconsin has an open primary. I think several states in the South have open primaries. Louisiana has something called a blanket primary, where it's a hodgepodge. You can go in, and doesn't matter what your party affiliation is, you can vote for whoever you want in the nomination process. But an open primary, and Wisconsin would be an example of this. If I am a Republican and I decide, let's take 2020 for example, this would be a classic example. There has not, well, I think there was one challenger that actually got on the ballot in a couple of states. His name was William Well, to challenge Trump, but that really didn't take off. So for all intents and purposes, Donald Trump was unopposed for the Republican nomination. Now, there will be a convention in the summer, or at least virtually, or I don't know, maybe they don't have it. But the Republican National Committee will have a process to renominate Donald Trump as their nominee for president. That most of the time that happens, but if you have an incumbent and is particularly unpopular, it has not been. Has happened in the past where the party will not renominate a sitting president. It happened in 1856. It happened in 1852. It happened in 1860. The last time it happened, and it's kind of a technicality, but in 1968, Lyndon Johnson was the president. He had been elected in 1964. He had taken over when Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. So he runs and wins in 1964. He could have run for a second term, but he decides not to do it. But it was after he had run in a couple of primaries and then not done well. And so he ended up kind of bowing out. But in a large degree, what was happening was that the Democratic Party was not supporting him, and he didn't want to go through with it. So that was really the last time where a sitting president was not renominated. But it has happened. Trump is going to be renominated again to be the Republican nominee for 2020. For the Democrats, very different story. They are vying, they're trying to determine who their nominee will be. So if I'm a Republican in 2020 and there is no contest to determine who's going to be the nominee, Wisconsin would allow me on primary day to declare that I want to vote in the Democratic primary. Now, why would they do such a thing? because on its face and really in reality, if you have an open primary and you're the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, one way of looking at it would be, do you want non-Democrats to determine who your nominee is going to be from the state of Wisconsin? Maybe that's not a good idea. The other way of looking at it is that maybe in an election year, maybe there are disgruntled Republicans who maybe are looking to change parties. Maybe this is a way for them to kind of, maybe lure them over into the other side. So it's a catch-22. A lot of southern states used open primaries in the 70s and 80s as the South was realigning from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. So that's a reason for doing it. A closed primary, which is like in the case of both Michigan and Pennsylvania as examples, if I'm a Democrat in Pennsylvania, the only primary that I can vote in is the Democratic primary. I can't switch over to the rival party if I so desired. And another fact of closed primaries is that independents cannot vote in either the Republican or the Democratic primary. Because if you're an independent, you're not a member of any party, which means that you don't get to have a say in who the nominee for that party is. And it kind of makes sense. Again, think about, let's say the Catholic, there was a Catholic party running candidates in Michigan. Would you want non-Catholics picking your candidate? Or how about if you were a Protestant congregation and you were picking your pastor, but you allowed Catholics to pick too? It's kind of like that. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you want to keep your brand, pure. Now, if your brand's up for grabs and you're trying to kind of redo some things, then maybe you do allow people to come in that are kind of off the street. Then there's modified open, modified closed. That has a lot to do with whether they allow independents and other third-party voters to vote in the primary, and the same reasons might apply. So those are primaries. Caucuses, you can have open and closed caucuses, but most caucuses are closed. And the major difference is that a primary, it's just a straight election. You go into a booth, you pick, you either punch the hole or swing the ballot or whatever you want, or maybe now there's electronic voting that's going on. But however they do it, you just vote and you leave. And that's how the nominee is determined. In a caucus, it's a meeting. It takes longer. You have to stay. There's preference voting. I think I showed you at Forum one day. So it's a very different process. I would argue it's a more deliberative process. I think it's probably a better process. But what ends up happening, and you'll see this on the chart, much fewer people participate in caucuses than primaries. And overall, if you look at all primary and caucus voters, they tend to be far less than half of all registered voters within a particular political party. So turnout tends to be much, much lower because, it takes more effort to actually stay in a caucus and make those kinds of decisions. Okay, so let's talk about the calendar a little bit. And I guess the best way to do that is maybe start doing the share screen here. So I'm going to click on this, see if this works. Look at that. Okay, so this is a map of the 2016 Democratic contest for the nomination of their party. And so if you look at the candidates, there were primarily it was a two-person race between Hillary Clinton, former First Lady, wife of Bill Clinton, former President of the United States, and then Bernie Sanders, who, interestingly enough, is not a Democrat. He is a socialist, but he caucuses with the Democrats as senator from Vermont. And it was really a two-person race for the nomination of the Democratic Party. So we're going to talk a little bit about rules and things like that right now. Now, if you look over here, you've got this little calendar here. So if you look at it, the first contest in 2016 is Iowa, and that is what we call a caucus. So Iowa starts February 1st. So that's the first contest of the year. Now, remember I was telling you about front loading. Front loading means that you're getting a lot more contests in the first part of the of a year. So if you look at March 1st, a lot of contests March 1st, and then there's another large number of states March 15th, March 22nd, March 26th. So by the end of March, you've got, again, just give me a second here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do this. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So by the first week of March, there's 20 states that have had a contest. Then 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. So of the 50 states, 35 of them will have gone by the end of March. Probably more than 75, 80% of all delegates are selected. Okay, so that's what we mean by front loading. Now, I think I talked about this last time, that if I was king, I would have regional primaries. I would actually have regional caucuses, but I would have a system of regional contests where you would have throughout, starting in February and really going all the way to June, you would have a series of regional contests, Northeast, Midwest. I mean, if you think about sports leagues, I would have the Big East, then I would have the Big Ten, then I would have the SEC, what we call the Southeastern Conference, that's the South. Then I would move further west, I would have the Big 12, which is, these states right around here. The SEC would be here, Northeast here, Midwest here. Then I would have, Mountain West and Big Sky Country. I'd have that contest, and then the Pac-12 right here. So I'd have 5 or 6 regional contests, and one of the reasons for that is that it would spread out the contests. It would be more deliberative, and and I would vary it up so each region would go have a chance to be the first instead of just having Iowa be the first one all the time. So anyway, that's the calendar, and it's become front loaded. So that's something you'll need to know and understand. But let's get back to the calendar a little bit. So Iowa was the first. Now, before I look at the results for Iowa, let's look at this is the overall results here for 2016. So let's look at delegates, okay? So here, this is the magic number here, right? We got this going on right here. So 2,131, that's how many delegates Hillary Clinton got. Bernie Sanders got 1,781. Let's see if I can do a little math here. Okay, let's get a total here. So we got 2,131 plus 1,781 plus 1,236 equals, that's 5,148. So that's even more than I thought. I thought it was more like 4,000. So it's 5,000. Now, maybe where I got the 4,000 was that 2,131 plus 1,781 equals 3,912. So those are the amount of delegates that are actually allocated by primaries and caucuses. But if you look at this number right here, you see the 1,236 right there? That are what we call superdelegates and other non-bound delegates, okay? And what that means is that these are often elected officials and other kind of bigwigs in the party that the state parties actually pick. And these folks are they're not bound to any candidate. We would call them kind of free agents, okay? So if you look at this percentage here, Clinton won 41% of the kind of at-large delegates, ones that are up for grabs in terms of these contests. Sanders won 34.5%, but 24% of all delegates were uncommitted. Those are the super delegates. One of the reasons why the Democrats did this is that they used to not have superdelegates. Really, from 1972 on, they really just had this kind of system up here. And what was happening was that, you know, your typical primary voters is a little bit more kind of educated, ideological, more polarizing, I guess, more kind of at the extremes of their party. The Democrats didn't really do very well in that system. If you're thinking about 72 with McGovern. Now, Carter did win. It was a very, very close election. It was after Watergate. And if Ford would have won about 3,000 more votes in Ohio, Ford would have won in 1976. 80 Reagan, 84 Reagan, 88 Bush. So 5 out of the 6 elections were won by Republicans. At that point, they changed the rules to make it a little bit less democratic and giving these office holders a little bit more of an opportunity to weigh in. And the idea was that they're a little bit more pragmatic and they might have a better idea of who could actually win in a general election campaign. Okay, so it was rather close. Now let's look at where where the base of support of these two people are. Hillary looks like was much more support in the South, and the deeper the color, the stronger their support. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at a general election map, this area right here is dominated by Republicans. And so what a lot of people would argue here is that these are more conservative Democrats, although I'm not sure that's the right word either, but certainly less progressive Democrats down here. Where is Bernie doing well? Bernie's doing well in New England. Of course, he's from Vermont, but he won 85% of that primary vote there. He also is winning this upper Midwest, which tends to be a little bit more progressive in their politics. And they're talking, and you're in this kind of mountain area, almost like a populism. And a lot of people argue that they have different ways of doing it, but both Sanders and Trump kind of represent populist wings of their respective parties. And so let's look at Iowa. So Iowa was a caucus. So that means, so this was pretty close. Clinton won that 49.84% to 49.59%. So Sanders, it was basically a virtual tie. So let's look at the results there. Let's click on that. So you look at the caucus result. These are the number of people who voted in there. This is the percentage. And then the delegates, look at them. None of them were actually bound at the first result, all right? So that was it was 54 delegates out of the total, and they were unallocated after the caucus result, okay? Now let's go back, see if we can go back to here. There we go. If we look at Iowa again, oh, I'm sorry. Let's see, let's go back. There we go. So the county convention, I wonder how you can get to that. Let's see if I can do this one more time. There's the counties, obviously Democrat population. Now, the more densely populated tended to be urban areas tended to vote a little bit more for Clinton. Rural voters tended to be a little bit more for Sanders. Okay, so that's the Iowa caucus. Now let's look at the New Hampshire primary. That's Sanders. Now here it's a little bit more, and you can see that there's kind of a proportionality to this. So Hillary got 37% of the primary vote. Sanders got 60%. So there was 8 allocated. So a total number 24. So New Hampshire has less delegates than Iowa. So, you know, there's 32. There are 32. Let's see here. 32 total delegates, and Bernie got 46.9%. I'm sorry, 0.469 equals. So he got 15 delegates out of the 32. Now, do you see how, and then Hillary got 28% of the remaining. And so that's what we call a proportional system, okay? A proportional system, meaning that if you got over a threshold amount of 15%, what the percentage of your popular vote was is how many delegates you got. So they ended up kind of doing ratios. And one of the results of that is that it usually takes a lot longer for the Democrats to get a nominee than the Republicans, who use a winner-take-all system. Now, we talked about regional primaries. If you look at March 1st and look at Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Virginia, where are those states? They are in the South, okay? So if you look there, a lot of these states here held their, so you got Alabama, obviously right there. You've got Arkansas there. You've got Georgia. You've got Tennessee. You've got Virginia. This is what we call Super Tuesday. And what happened was, both for the Republicans and Democrats, the Southerners wanted to hold a bulk of their contests on one day to kind of force the candidates to focus on their region and maybe some of the issues that are a little bit more important for them, okay? And as a result, so this was a big contest here, right? And if you look at it, let's take a look at Colorado. Colorado was a caucus, different way of doing it. And so Bernie got 48% of the caucus vote and got 38 delegates. Hillary got 35% and got 28. And then again, there are some delegates that are unallocated, meaning that they're kind of free agents. Those are those super delegates, again, that go to the convention, and and in 2016, they all went hard for Hillary. In 2008, a lot of the super delegates were kind of conflicted because Hillary was running against Barack Obama. And there was actually some talk that they might be more desirous of voting for Hillary, but they also didn't want to vote for the first African-American nominee for president. And so they ended up kind of moving more toward Obama than Clinton. I might show you that result in a moment. Let's look at Massachusetts. Hillary, that was a very close, look at that, 38.8. The primary vote was almost a dead heat. Hillary got 49.9, Bernie 48.5, and they really split those four grabs delegates, 45 apiece. But then again, there's 26 that are unallocated, and many of them in 2016 went for Clinton. Let's look at Texas. All right, so obviously a more populous state. So one thing you might, Hillary is getting more moderate Democrats, and Bernie is getting places that are a little bit more progressive. And you would say the same thing probably for the difference between Joe Biden and Bernie in 2020. Let's see. Vermont, that was pretty much a landslide for Bernie. So again, you get an idea of the calendar, you get a little idea of the rules for allocating delegates. Now that's for the Democrats. Let's look at the 2016 Republican. All right, now one thing that should jump right out at you is that there were a lot more candidates for the Republicans in 2016 than for the Democrats. And that might make some sense. The Democrats were coming off 2 terms of Barack Obama. Hillary had served in the Obama administration. She had run against Obama in 2008. And so there was this idea that she was kind of owed the nomination. They didn't expect to have Bernie Sanders running. But the bottom line was that there were fewer candidates running for the Democrats. For the Republicans, look at this, all over the map, right? And of course, the person that nobody thought was going to win ends up winning with Donald Trump. So you have several candidates here. You've got Trump, Cruz, Rubio comes in third in the number of delegates. John Kasich, he was the one that's kind of stayed in the longest. Okay, he actually, interestingly enough, and this is where you kind of see how sometimes caucuses end up being a little bit more, it's not as proportional in terms of how they allocate delegates in this way. But if you look at Trump, I mean, so Rubio actually got less, if you look at the percentages here, Kasich got 160, Rubio got 173, but look at Kasich. He got 4 million votes, and Rubio only got 3 million votes, but Rubio got more Kasich votes. Now, what happened? Rubio actually did better in caucuses than he did in primaries, and so that ends up kind of skewing the results a little bit. Okay. So you've got, let's look at the map a little bit. So you got Trump in orange. That's funny because his hair is orange. And then Cruz is yellow. And, Cruz is a conservative Republican. Trump is more of a populist Republican. I would call Rubio kind of a neoconservative Republican. And Kasich, I would argue, is kind of an establishment Republican, along with somebody like a Jeb Bush. Paul was more of a libertarian, so on and so forth. I mean, look at, Carson got more votes than Bush. Real repudiation of, the Bush family here, that actually Carson got more votes. And look, it's interesting. Florida. A lot of Republicans living in Florida. Of course, Trump has a summer home in Florida. You might say that the Republicans like Florida. Anyway, kind of interesting. So let's look at, in terms of the primary vote, 7, 10, 14, if you look at all of this, if you add up all the people who did not vote for Trump, especially these top three, Cruz, Rubio, Kasich, right? 4, 3, 7. So that is 14, probably more like 15 million votes right here. How many did Trump get? 13 million. So more people voted against Trump than for Trump in the Republican nomination process. But look how many delegates he got, 60.3%. So what's that mean? What that means is that instead of a proportional system of allocating delegates, the Republicans adopt more of a winner-take-all system. I mean, and the caucus results are even more. I think the people who are much more kind of ideological, meaning in the Republican Party more conservative, look, Cruz whipped Trump 39% to 27% in terms of caucus results. But because more delegates are allocated by primary than caucus, and because of the Republican winner-take-all system, you can have somebody who actually wins a very small plurality of the vote, not a majority, a plurality, winning a landslide in terms of delegate count. So, I mean, this is 60, you add them all up, 30, 36, 41. It's a 60-40 split, really, in terms of delegates, but it's not a 60-40 split in terms of actual votes. It was a lot closer, in other words, than what it looks like on paper, but that's because the rules are different between Republicans and Democrats. I can tell you this, guys, this is going to be a long lecture because I'm just doing this one. We're going to kind of wrap up a lot of stuff here. Okay, so just bear with me. All right, so let's look inside a couple of results. So you can see the calendar. It's pretty much the same, although sometimes Republicans will have a different date for their primary than the Democrats. Most of the time that doesn't happen because the states don't want to have the cost of actually having 2 election cycles, but sometimes it actually happens that way. So, there's your Super Tuesday, there's your March 12th was also March 15th was also a big day with Florida, Missouri. So let's look at Florida. Florida was a good example because Rubio was a senator from Florida, but Trump lived in Florida. Let's look at the map first. I'm sorry. Yeah, so you look at Brown. Brown was kind of, I don't know where, how's Brown? Brown is like, I don't know, a combination of, there's a primary, so Trump, I guess Brown is really deep orange. So look at Trump. Trump just pasted everybody, 73%. Let's look at California, see what the results are there. Let's see. Some of these, okay, there's Trump. Now Ohio, that's Kasich, that's home. So Kasich actually won his home state, right? There's Texas. Now that's yellow is Cruz. He's from Texas, so that's an interesting selection there. So let's look at Florida. So the result is Trump 45, Rubio 27, Cruz 17. So this is a good example. Let's see what happens here. All right, boom. This is a great example of the winner-take-all system. So you got, if you add up Kasich, Cruz, and Rubio, right? And part of this too is you can see these different wings of the Republican Party. I would say Cruz is kind of a die-in-the-wool conservative, social conservative and fiscal conservative. Kasich is a moderate Republican. And an establishment Republican. Rubio, younger guy, I would call him kind of a neocon, very aggressive in foreign policy, wants America to invade almost any country that is kind of bothering us. His father's from Cuba, so there's kind of an anti-communist streak to his politics. And he's also pro-immigration, so he's against restrictive immigration. Now look at Bush. Bush was the former governor of Florida. Look just how bad he did, 1.8%. I mean, that's just pathetic, okay? Just shows you there was a complete repudiation of the status quo. Bush Republican, kind of a moderate, kind of compassionate conservative type of thing. He just got crushed, okay? So 50% of these candidates here, Rubio, Cruz, Kasich. So, one of the things you might argue is that why didn't they all get together and just decide, okay, can we just have one candidate continue? But this shows you how party politics works. None of these three wanted to give the other one an opportunity to go head to head with Trump. And because of that, they ended up splitting their vote. So Trump got 45%. It was a plurality, not a majority, but there were 99 delegates at stake in Florida. And what does that mean? That means he gets all 99. That's a winner-take-all system. So is it easier for Republicans to sew up the nomination early because of their system? Absolutely. You might also say that's a little less democratic, small d democratic than that particular system, okay? Let's go back to just to kind of keep an eye on the ball here. So this is the national. So you can see 2,388 delegates. So that's less than half of the amount of delegates that the Democratic Party has as well, okay? Let's see here. Let's look at another result here. These early states were actually interesting for Trump. Iowa, Cruz won Iowa, so isn't that interesting? 8. Now Iowa, because it's a caucus, they're much more of a proportional system, okay? So caucuses are more proportional and primaries are more winner-take-all in the Republican rule book. So Trump did much better than expected. He won 7 versus 8. So he didn't really kind of smash the opposition. So Trump had certainly not sewn up the nomination in Iowa. New Hampshire, let's kind of look at now there. Trump is starting to kind of expand a little bit, right? So he wins 35% of the primary vote and 11 delegates. Now here you get an idea of the threshold rules. So the Republican Party clearly has a rule that if you get less than 10% of the primary vote, you get 0 delegates. So look at Christie, former governor of New Jersey. He got 7.3% of the primary vote, 0 delegates, okay? And delegates are the name of the game. Now, I believe South Carolina was really where a lot of people thought that both Cruz and Rubio would do well there. Here, classic winner take all, right? So Trump only beats Rubio by 10 percentage points. Not that much, but he gets all 50 delegates. So now he's starting to stack up delegate counts. Let's look at Nevada. There's a caucus. Now, again, caucuses, rules are different. It's more proportional. So, you know, by this point, it's still kind of even Steven in terms of, but Trump got a lot of those delegates in South Carolina, okay? Now, you might ask, you know, generally speaking, it's usually the more people that live in a state means that there are more delegates from that state. That's usually true. But they also factor in, both parties factor in the fact that if a state has been voting Republican or Democrat for a long period of time, sometimes they reward the state party with more delegates, okay, because they're trying to encourage the state to kind of flip or stay with their particular party. So let's look at Texas. This is a good example. So Texas is Cruz's home state, and by and large, he wins it. Now, it looks like Texas has a different set of rules. It's more proportional. So Trump got 31% of the delegates. He got more delegates than his proportion, 26.75. Now, Cruz got a lot more than Trump did, but he didn't. He got 43% of the primary vote, but 67% of the delegates. So it's not strict proportional. It's a little bit more, it's weighted, in other words. Okay. Georgia, I think, is an interesting one too. There, Georgia does more of a proportional system, 56% delegates to 22, even though it's only there's like a 34 percentage point difference in delegates compared to a 15% difference in the actual vote. So it's not proportional. 6%, Carson, guess what he got? Got 0. Okay. Let's see here. Let's go to March 15th. This was a big one. Let's look at Ohio. Okay. So there's a winner-take-all system. Kasich got 47% of the primary vote, but all 66 of the delegates. So a lot of people thought, oh, you know, maybe at this point, so Kasich, it's March 15th, maybe he can kind of get some momentum. And a lot of this is about momentum, right? So so you go to the next set of contests. Arizona was the big one there. Looks like Trump just where's Kasich? Kasich is, look at that. In Arizona, the threshold must be, I mean, there's nothing. It's total winner take all. It's the first person, you know, it's the person with one more vote than the other gets all of the delegates. So is that helping Trump? You bet. Wisconsin, I think, was important because I think Trump did very well here, and it kind of catapulted him to actually flipping the map for the general election. So I hope, and of course his home state of New York, this was a shellacking. Now Kasich got 24%. So New York does it a little bit differently. It's not a pure winner take all, but it's mostly winner take all. So by the time the national convention rolls around, Trump is the clear winner. He's got 60% of the vote, and away we go. Now, really quickly, in the interest of time, in terms of running campaigns, I think there's a big difference between whether there is a incumbent running for office or if it's an open seat. Now, in 2016, it was an open seat. Obama had won twice, and he was term limited. So it's an open seat. So you get a lot more competition. And you're prospectively voting. You're thinking about the future. 2008 was another open seat because you had 2 terms of Bush, and people were tired of the Republicans, tired of Bush, and they gave Obama a chance. Retrospective voting, excuse me, that's when voters look to the past. They say, okay, how has the incumbent done? And the big issue is, am I better off now than I was 4 years ago? That is the calculation that most voters make, particularly economically. Now, this is why this COVID-19 thing is so fascinating, because up until March, most people economically were doing better in 2020 than they were in 2016. That meant that the incumbent is going to have a pretty good chance of winning re-election. And again, I'm not talking about the personalities, and I'm not talking about the Trump in particular. But if you look historically, if the economy is growing, and you look at economic growth in 4 years before, from the time he was elected versus re-elected, and there's growth, that is a very, very good sign for the incumbent. Now, all bets are off, right? Because the economy is contracting. There's double-digit unemployment. It's a mess. Now, the issue will be, will the voters blame Trump for the contraction, or will they blame the virus? Or will they blame Trump for his handling of the virus? And so a lot of times elections turn on unexpected crises. This was, before COVID, this was turning out to be kind of a very conventional election where people were going to retrospectively vote and ask that basic question, am I better off now than I was 4 years ago? And if the answer is yes, incumbents usually win those presidential elections, even somebody like Trump, who is very controversial in his personality. Another important point about campaigns is that most of the money that's raised, and we're going to talk about money tomorrow, but most of the money that is raised by these candidates, whether it's the primary or the general, is used to pay for television advertising. We'll show some TV ads tomorrow when we do our class, but most of that money goes to ads. And then there's negative ads, there's positive ads. A lot of people don't like the negative ads because they think it's not kind of fair that you would focus too much attention on that. I like the contrast ad. There's nothing that says that you can't go after your opponent for having differences of opinion. And the whole idea of politics is to draw a contrast between you and your opponent. And you're saying, hey, man, I have better ideas than you. That's what we want out of contests. So, politics ain't beanbag. Politics is competitive. And so you're going to get that kind of stuff. But is it negative in the sense of, are you lying? Is it made up? Or is it a distortion of the truth? Or is it just portion of the truth? I heard an ad that was kind of a play on the Reagan ad, Morning in America, that was produced in 1984, looking at kind of, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? This was a 1984 ad when he was running for re-election. And he's like, hey, to maybe use a Trump saying, hey, I wanted to make America better and great again, and I have. Now, I heard this ad yesterday, not MORNING mourning, but MOURNING, like I'm mourning for the death of somebody. So they were saying it's mourning in America, and they were blaming Trump for the COVID-19 deaths. Now, some people might say, well, he hasn't handled it well, maybe, and that's, maybe that's true. Or some people might say that that's not true, that that's actually a cheap shot, and that, if we're going to blame anybody, maybe we blame the Chinese, maybe, and not President Trump. But the point is, that's what we would call kind of an attack ad or a negative campaign ad. So there's different types of those things. You also have radio ads. Those are more of a kind of, you're segmenting your market. Because like if you're listening to NPR, you tend to be left of center. And so maybe you would, try to get your base out there. And if you're listening to like Rush Limbaugh, if you're a conservative, then maybe you hear different types of radio ads depending upon what the audience is. Because and now with social media, it's all the same. Like you can actually, oh, you go to these particular websites, therefore we'll buy ads and put them banner ads on your website. So social media is also something that has changed the way people purchase advertising. But most of this is, it's not candidates going to town hall meetings and talking to voters. It's face to face. These are mostly, just like we sell laundry detergent and beer and pizza and cars and whatever, we sell candidates like we sell products. We use television ads. Now the rallies, campaign rallies, we have those too. Often they are designed to get televised. So it's all about getting coverage on the media. And if the news is covering it, that's what we call free advertising, because you didn't pay for it, but the media decided to cover it. The cable news channels often cover campaign rallies. And I'll say this, I think that the Trump rally is a new phenomenon. It's bigger. These things are being held until the COVID-19 thing, were being held in large sporting arenas with lines out front. That tells me that there's something going on. And I would argue it's realignment. But most of the people would have said before Trump that, well, you can't really read too much into that, because both sides are going to have people that are loyal to them, and they're going to turn out. And it's more about, you'd be better off just buying more TV ads. I don't know about that. In fact, I think that even though obviously you can't fit millions and millions of people into an arena, the enthusiasm that those generate might indicate that, for every one person that's in that gym, maybe they're representing maybe 5 to 10 other people that maybe would have liked to have been there but just couldn't make it. So there's something about that. Now in the general election, we've got something. It's not constitutional. You don't have to do these things. But since 1960, we've had televised presidential debates, and they've become kind of a ritual in our system. They've tended to be at least 2, oftentimes maybe 3, maybe even 4, punctuating kind of starting in the fall after the conventions. Of course, the conventions are kind of a rite of passage and a ritual that we have with our political system. And so the debates are kind of a way for the American public to size up the candidates. The Hillary-Trump debates were very highly watched compared to most presidential debates of the past. Now, whether they are intellectually fulfilling, I don't know, but they tend to be pretty strong factors in terms of shifting momentum slightly. And you don't have to shift momentum a whole lot to actually make a change. And so these debates become very, very important. Another dynamic of these campaigns is that sometimes you don't know what's going to happen. I think in 2016, the 2 things that kind of happened that people weren't expecting is that there was this kind of revelation about some of Trump's extramarital affairs. And then there was all these emails that got leaked to the public from Hillary Clinton's private email server. Those 2 things, I would argue, kind of negated each other. But those were unexpected, and that changed people's perspectives on things. Is there any doubt that the primary major issue not the only one, but the major one, is going to be the reaction to this virus? And does that change people's perspectives on things? If the economy goes down, do you blame Trump for it, or do you blame the virus? Is this an example where Trump is exercising good presidential leadership in a time of a crisis? And when we look at the presidency, isn't that the case, that sometimes crises should not be wasted by candidates and by presidents? So that's a very, very important issue, I think. And so sometimes the unexpected kind of pops up. And also, sometimes foreign policy matters that are out of our control, that require American leadership and American response, that sometimes changes the center of gravity of a campaign. And so sometimes dirty tricks, basically The other campaign will do opposition research and find out kind of bad things that happened in somebody's personal life 20, 30 years ago. I remember 1992 with Clinton. There was a woman by the name of Jennifer Flowers that came out and basically said, and it actually turned out to be absolutely true, that she had had a torrid extramarital relationship in Arkansas when he was governor. He denied it. Later it became, actually the evidence was pretty true that it had happened, but it didn't matter. Clinton ended up winning. And, you know, same way with Trump. Trump, it was pretty much proven that he had had those affairs, but the American public did not end up, at the end of the day, holding that against him because they ended up winning. Okay, so again, this is going to go a little bit longer than expected. I apologize, but I want to try to get this all done in kind of one fell swoop because we're going to have this live class tomorrow. All right, so let's look. So these are the primary results. Let's look at the general election results in 2016. So this is the whole thing about, now that you've got the nominees and you've talked about some of their tactics, now how do you build a winning coalition? Okay, so this is what we want to look at right now. So now I apologize in advance. The television networks have settled upon the convention that red states are for the Republicans and blue states are for the Democrats. Now this particular website, which was built before those determinations were being made, they can do the complete opposite. So in this map, again, not to confuse you, red state is Democrat and blue state is Republican. Okay, so this is 2016. Now, what do you get when you mix red and blue? You get purple. And so even though you look at a state and you say, oh, it's blue, okay? Is it light blue, like Pennsylvania? Is it dark blue, like Oklahoma or Wyoming? That depends upon the level of support for one particular party or another, okay? So generally speaking, let's look at this map. Now, first of all, let's look at who wins. We don't win the presidency by the popular vote. And if it was, who would have won? Clinton got 48% of the popular vote, Trump roughly 46%. So she beat him by 2 percentage points in the popular vote. But she is not the president. Trump is. Why? Because he won a majority of the Electoral College, 304 to 227. So he got 46% of the popular vote and over 56% of the Electoral College vote. And this has to do with the rules that, except for in Maine and Maine and Nebraska, it is a winner-take-all system for the Electoral College. So you win one more vote, you win all of the state's Electoral College votes for 48 states. Now, let's look at this. Let's look at the coalition. The Democratic Party is a party of the coasts. It is the Northeast, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts. This is the base of their support, okay? Virginia is interesting. Is Virginia a southern state or is it a northeastern state? It's starting to look more like a northeastern state in terms of how they are voting. Then you have some Midwest states. Illinois, large city in Chicago, large constituency, pretty strong Democrat. Minnesota, now look at that. This is changing. Clinton won this, 46.4 to really Trump 45%. So she won by about 1.5 percentage points. But look at this Johnson guy. Johnson is a libertarian. He won 3.84%. If, let's say you give Johnson's votes 50, let's say it's 60% to Trump and 40% to Clinton. Trump wins Minnesota. And so what do you think Trump's trying to do next time around? He's trying to get libertarians to vote for him and not their own candidate, okay? California, look at that, 61.48% to 31.49%. So let's, if we go back to the national, let's look at, she ended up winning, she had about She got about 3 million more votes than Trump, okay, popular votes, okay? So let's look at the margin in California. So you look at the margin there, she doubled his vote total in California. She killed him in California. So where is the major part of her popular vote majority? It's in California, okay? And I'm pretty sure Trump did not campaign in California. Why would you? Okay. Now, with that said, okay, he did win some counties in the valley, in the desert, less populated, of course. But look at these. You know, this is Santa Clara. This is San Francisco. Okay, that's, yeah, Alameda, San Francisco, right there. Here's Los Angeles County. Look at that, Clinton, 71%. Just shellacked Trump in California, okay? Let's also look at, let's go back to the map. Let's look at New York. 60, another shellacking, 59 to 36. Okay, now Trump did win some counties in upstate and around the Lake Erie area, kind of a former industrial area. Another, 2.5 million votes there. Okay, so New York and California, she won by a ton, but if she beats him by 30 percentage points or 1 percentage point, it doesn't matter, does it? She gets all 29 electoral votes. And because of that, New York and California were not battleground states because one side knew that they were going to lose, and therefore they just didn't campaign. Okay, so what were the battleground states in 2016? Well, before we get to that. So the Democratic Party is a party of coasts. Boom, boom. The rest of this country, although look what's happening in Colorado. This is close, 48 to 43, but Colorado is trending toward the Democrats. New Mexico, 48 to 40. Look at Johnson. Johnson got 9%. The Libertarian got 9% of the New Mexico vote. Now, I think Trump, I know that Trump is going to try to win New Mexico. And he's thinking, hey, if I can win some libertarians in New Mexico and some libertarians in Minnesota, I might be able to flip those two states, okay? Because he might not be able to win some states that he won in 2016. More on that in a moment. Now, where's the Republican Party? The Republican Party, look at the deep blue. It is a Southern party, okay? And it's also it's Midwest and Upper Midwest, Great Plains, and Far West, okay? Trump pretty close in Arizona, okay? So that's kind of the regional coalition for the Republican Party. Okay, now I want to do something just for fun. Now remember how that map looked, okay? So Republicans are in the South and the West, and the Democratic parties in the Northwest, and the Northeast and the coasts. Okay, so let's look at general. Let's look at 1896. So over 200 years ago. Now look what's happened. The parties have completely flip-flopped. In 1896, the Democrats were a Northeast, Midwest, Upper Midwest, and coastal party. What was the Democrats? Deep South, Great Plains, Rocky Mountains. So here's an issue. Did the parties change or did the people change? I'll let you guys ponder that, okay? Now, in 1896, a Southern and Western coalition got killed. McKinley won 60 to 40% of the electoral vote and over 1 million popular vote, okay? So South and West lose to Northeast and Far West. In 2016, different colors, same coalition. What did Trump do? He won. He won 56 to 42. Now he lost the popular vote, but it wasn't 2-1. Okay. And so what's happened to the American population? It has shifted from here to here. What are some of the big states? Florida, is that pretty close? Oh, I was talking about battleground states. Where are the states that are close? Florida, 48-47. So are both parties going to campaign there? You bet. Look at Pennsylvania, 48-47. Is Pennsylvania a battleground state? You bet. Now, for a long time, Ohio was about the same percentage, 1, 2, 3%. Ohio's been trending a little bit more strongly Republican. Might not be a battleground state this time around. No Republican, by the way, has ever won the presidency without winning Ohio. Home state of Michigan, I mean, that's a tie, 47-2, 47.03. Johnson's on the ticket. I don't think the Libertarian's going to do as well as this time around. So we'll see. So Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Look at that, 47-2 to 46.65. Those are battleground states. Iowa, looks like pretty strong Republican. That used to be a battleground state. Let's look at, there's 48-43. There's New Mexico. Arizona, 48. I would argue Arizona is a battleground. Nevada, 47-45. I'd say that's a battleground state. You had some splitting there, 3% for Johnson. I think Johnson's from that part of the world. Virginia, 49-44. Clinton won that pretty good. But there might be some things going on in Virginia that might, I would say that Trump probably will campaign there. North Carolina, very close. Look at that, 48.8 to 46.1. That's another battleground state. Georgia is becoming a little bit closer. Atlanta is becoming a bigger city, more population, and hence that. So how many states did I mention? 10, 12 states? That's where the election will hinge. Because then, a state like Texas, 52-43, that's not really a battleground state. Biden's not going to, campaign in Utah, 45-27. Okay, got McMullen. He was a Republican, 21%. I don't think he's running again. Oh, New Hampshire's going to be a battleground. Sorry, there it is. That was razor thin, 46.8, 46.4. Look at, all right, so Maine's an interesting state. This is not a winner-take-all system. So Hillary won the whole state, 47-44, pretty close. But Trump got one electoral vote because he won Congressional District 2, and the Democrats won Congressional District 1. Now, there's more people who live here than live here. There's more Bears and French Canadians here than actual Democrats. Okay, so this is an example where you could split the vote, and Trump could maybe flip this. It would be interesting to see. So there's a lot of states that are up for grabs. I want to do a real quick comparison. Bear with me. I want to look at 2004. Well, let's go back to 2016 national. Okay, so that's the map. I want you to keep an eye on these states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada. Okay, keep an eye, and Virginia. So Virginia, Democrat; Colorado, Democrat; New Mexico, Democrat; Nevada, Democrat; Pennsylvania, Republican; Michigan, Republican; Wisconsin, Republican. All right. So 3 Republican states. 1, 2, 3, 4, Democrat states. Okay, ready? So that's 2016. Let's go to 2004. So this is Bush's re-election campaign. Now, the dynamic is still rather the same, right? You know, the Democratic Party is a Northeast and Far West party. Republicans, South and West. Now, Bush won more states than Trump, but he got 286 electoral college votes. Trump got 304. So Trump got more electoral votes, but won less states. Okay. So what does that mean? That means he won a few states, bigger states, that Bush lost. Okay. Now, what were they? Remember the states that I asked you to remind yourself of. What did Pennsylvania do in 2016? They voted for Trump. In 2004, they voted for Kerry over Bush. Now, was it close? Yeah, 51-48. How about Michigan? Another 51-48 contest. Wisconsin, that was even closer. 49-7, 49-3. And just for kicks, close too. So what's happening in the upper Midwest? It's flipping. It's turning. Okay? And Pennsylvania to me, that's going to be the coin flip. Trump doesn't win Pennsylvania, he'll lose the presidency unless he picks up a state like Minnesota, New Hampshire, or one of these states out here. Now, remember those other states. New Mexico, who won that in 2016? Hillary. Who won it in 2004? Bush. Very, very close. Colorado. 51-47, Bush, no longer. Nevada, Bush, 51-48. So these states went from Republican to Democrat. Virginia, another one, 53-45. You see, Virginia has really flipped hard for the Democrats. All right, so Virginia, Democratic state in 2016. New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada. Those flipped for the Democrats. What flipped for the Republicans? Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And when you add and you do the adds and subtractions, who ended up getting benefited? Trump did. Trump won less states, but won more electoral college votes. Now, Bush, with this map, won over 50% of the popular vote. In 2016, Trump won 46% of the popular vote and 304 electoral college votes. So those states that I just mentioned are going to be battleground states. Florida remains very, very tight, 48.6. Oh, I wanted to show you Florida in 2000. Poor Al Gore. Let's look at Florida. 2,912, 790 to 253. So 790 votes. Okay, so Florida has 25 electoral college votes during that period of time, I think. So 790 minus 253. George Bush won Florida by 537 votes, and most people argue that we'll never really know who won Florida. But because of the winner take all, he won 25 electoral college votes. Now, if you take away, he won 271 to 266. He won by 5 electoral college votes. So if you take those 537 votes away from Bush and give the 25 electoral college votes to Gore, who's president? Al Gore is. Now, look at New Hampshire. Bush won that really, really close. Let's look at that. He won that 48 to 46 of 4 electoral college votes. So that would have made the difference in 2016. Let's look at New Mexico. Gore won that by, it was even closer. New Mexico was the closest in 2000. Look at that. That's crazy. 783 minus 417. 366 votes. All right, Gore won that one. And by the way, there were people that said that there were like 5,000 votes that people just found like in a box in somebody's backseat of the car, and then that they were added to Gore's total. So this was unbelievable how close this election was in 2000. Okay, but hopefully you understand kind of the coalitions there, red states, blue states. But you know, let's see. Let's look at Michigan. Let's look at Michigan closely in 2016. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so did I hit Wisconsin? I hit Wisconsin. Sorry. Michigan. There we go. There we go. All right. So let's look at Emmett County. There's Emmett. So Trump won Emmett 56.36%. Okay. So that's a pretty good. Look at so there's Marquette County. I bet there's some industry there. So Clinton won that one 48-44. It's an interesting little result. All right, Wayne County, that's Detroit. Clinton won that big time. Let's look inside there. So she won 519,000 to 228,000. That's a pretty significant total there. Okay. She won, I think that's Flint right there. Kalamazoo. Now, where's Grand Rapids? Is that Grand Rapids? Ottawa County. Yeah, Ottawa County, I think is Grand Rapids. Trump won that pretty convincingly. Okay. Or maybe it's Kent. Maybe it's Kent. I think that's Grand Rapids. My apologies. Okay. So you can kind of see territorially, Trump won Michigan. But because most people live in the southeastern portion of the state, it was very, 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 very close. Oakland County, that's another suburb of Detroit. Clinton won that 51-43, so on and so forth. Okay. Now you look at the total amount, 227, 226. It's really, really, really close. We're talking 11,000 votes. Very, very close. So any one of these counties, I think it's gonna be very, very close again. Okay. Now what's happening with this COVID virus? Does this help Trump? Does it help Biden if he's the candidate? There's actually a chance that Biden's not the candidate. He's got a extramarital affair that he's kind of fending off, so we'll see how that goes. Last thing I want to talk about is that why people vote the way they vote. Okay, so we have race. I mean, if you look at Michigan, Wayne County, primarily African American, they vote very strongly for the Democratic Party. You look at Emmett County, primarily white voters tend to vote Republican. That's a generalization. That doesn't mean that there aren't blacks who vote Republican and whites that vote Democrat, but that's typically what we've got here. How about class, poor or rich? As I mentioned, a little bit of switch there. Really super rich people tend to vote Democrat. Really super poor people tend to vote Democrat, but upper middle class, Republican, and then middle, and lower middle those are the voters that are up for grabs. Okay, so this is one of the poorest parts of Michigan right here. And how are they voting? They're voting for the Republican. Very, very different set of circumstances there. Gender. Women tend to vote Democrat. Men tend to vote Republican. But that also varies. Married women, Republican. Single women, Democrat. Religion. Those who have it tend to vote Republican. Those who don't tend to vote Democrat. What kinds of religions? Evangelical Protestants, strongly Republican. Catholics, split. Now that depends upon whether they attend church or not. Churchgoers of all stripes tend to vote Republican. People who are affiliated with the religion that are not church-going or don't attend church regularly, they tend to vote Democrat. Region, let's let's go back to the map. Let's see. There we go. So obviously you got the blue state red thing, South Republican, Northeast Democrat, Pacific Northwest, Far West Democrat, Rocky Mountain, Great Plains Republican. But you know, let's do Utah. I mean, Utah's pretty. That's a weird one. Let's do another one. Yeah, why don't we do Arizona? Okay, so this is. Yeah, so this is it. This is Phoenix. Yeah. Hillary won Phoenix. Okay, so 224 to 167. Phoenix is primarily suburban, and Democrats do much better in suburban places than they do in rural places, for example. So the suburban vote is actually a battleground place. Let's look at Pennsylvania, where I live. I can talk this pretty easily. All right, so I live in Chester County. This is the first time, I think, ever that the Democrats won Chester County. Okay, 51-42. Shows you that Trump is not very popular, and did very badly among women in this particular set of circumstances. Okay, let's look at Chester. Yeah, there you go. So this is actually more rural. I live, let me see, I'll show you where I live. Oh yeah, here we go. Willistown. Where am I? Oh, come on. This is kind of fun. Westchester, Westtown, Willistown. Oh, there's Tradition. So I live in Tradition Township. So Clinton won that big time, 60-34. So that's very, very new. Tradition Township is usually a very strong Republican. Okay. In fact, let's go back to, well, anyway, so that's my county right there. Now, one thing that's happening inside of Pennsylvania is that this is Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has been trending more Republican. Now, Clinton won it, but by a lot less. But these counties in and around, these have all shifted to the Republican. These all used to be steel towns and all used to be unions, households, and very strong Democrat. That is no longer the case. Okay. In fact, I'll do an interesting one. Let's look at 1936. 1936. Let's look at the Democrats. Oh, they don't have the county map. Oh, that's too bad. No, you know what? Let's do Clinton's reelection. We'll have that. Yeah, let's do that. So there's Clinton. See all these counties here? These are all Democratic counties in Pennsylvania. These are all now, except for Allegheny, these are all Republican. That's the realignment that we're talking about here. The realignment that's occurring is among working class whites shifting from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. Okay? So there's religion, there's education level. These areas right here are poorer and less educated. They're tending to vote more for the Republicans than the Democrats. That's a new phenomenon. Okay. Age, older, has, the baby boom generation tends to be a little bit more Democrat. The World War II generation and shortly thereafter, a little bit more Republican, although the New Deal kind of affected that. Younger people have been trending toward the Democratic Party. A lot of people believe that Obama really solidified that, but there's a difference. Young people, let's say 18 to 30, that have a high school degree only, they're more likely to vote for the Republican. People who have a college degree tend to vote more for the Democrat among young voters. So there is kind of an education class divide in terms of that situation. Professions, union households tend to be more Democratic, although that's kind of changing a little bit. Doctors, Republican. Lawyers, Democrat. That's an interesting little situation. Okay, what are some of the issues that people vote on? The economy, right? You know, pocketbook issues, very, very important. How about social issues? Pro-life, pro-choice, gun control, those kinds of issues. We call those social issues. Those have a particular relevance to a lot of people. Character. There's no question that Trump's character is a big issue. If he would have had, if he hadn't had COVID and Trump would have been a conventional politician, he would have probably won in a landslide. But what makes Trump Trump is what makes people worry about him, because his character is, how would I say it, less than conventional. And then foreign policy crises. Sometimes you can't control what goes on around the world. I've actually noticed that the North Koreans are starting to test bombs again. Maybe they go crazy. I don't know. This whole OPEC thing could blow up. Maybe. And how about China? I mean, do we blame the COVID-19 crisis on China? Maybe China does something provocative in the South China Sea and we send our Navy there and they shoot at us. Maybe we want to, maybe Seamus is right. We go to war with China. I don't know. But those are things that are kind of unpredictable. And they all affect the way people vote. So to wrap up, and we'll hopefully, after hearing me talk for a long, long time, this will set up for a really good conversation for tomorrow. But this map here in 2016, here's to me, Pennsylvania is the key. I think Biden, who's from Delaware, right here, he was born in Scranton. In fact, let's look at Scranton. Is that Monroe, Carbon, Luzerne, Lackawanna? Yeah, so that is Scranton right there. So Hillary won that 49.7 to 46.3. Okay, it was close. Now that is much better for a Republican than it's ever been. Okay, Biden is from Lackawanna County. So let's say he does a little bit better, right? Let's say he does a little bit better in Lackawanna County. What was the percentage of the vote? 297, 219. I mean, this is close, man. We're talking about 35,000 votes for Trump. Okay, so if he can do a little, if Biden can do a little bit better up here, right? Maybe he flips a few of these over here. Possible. This is Harrisburg right here. Okay, Center County. And these ring counties in Philadelphia, they're going to be big, right? And I mean, let's say suburban women just who hate Trump just come out in droves against him. Pennsylvania could flip back. So to me, that is going to be a very important state. Michigan, very, very important. Okay, Wisconsin, extremely important. These three are going to look for them in terms of that. Minnesota, if Trump loses Pennsylvania, let's see how many electoral votes that is. That's 20 electoral votes for Pennsylvania. So let's say Trump loses that, he's got to make it up somewhere else. Does he make it up? So that means that 247, 304. See, he'd still win if he loses Pennsylvania, but just barely. 10. So let's say he could get back some of that by winning Minnesota. How about New Hampshire? That's 4. That was really close. My goodness. Very, very, very close. A couple hundred votes. I'm sorry, 3,000 votes. So that's 14. Let's see. Maine. That's 18. So that's one way of doing it, right? Now, if you're Biden, maybe you flip Pennsylvania, but now you're going to need to get one more state. Let's go to Florida. 29. Well, there you go. If Biden can flip Florida and Pennsylvania, he's president of the United States. Okay? Let's see, Ohio, he's not flipping Ohio. What's another state that, Virginia, Trump may, I don't know, Trump may be able to win Virginia. Let's see, what's another state that Biden could flip? North Carolina. Yeah, Trump, maybe he wins North Carolina. I think it'll be hard. That's 15. He's definitely president there too. So look for Pennsylvania, look for Michigan, look for Florida, New Hampshire, Maine, maybe Arizona. Okay? So that's it for today. Tomorrow, we'll kind of talk a little bit about this stuff that I've mentioned, kind of get your feel about who you think is going to win or lose. And then we'll talk about campaign finance reform. The big issue there is money too much of an issue in terms of politics? And maybe we should have more rules that make it fairer for other people to maybe be able to run for office. Or maybe money's not a big deal. Maybe if you have enough to kind of put your message out, maybe it's less about money and more about the issues. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay? I think that's all I have. So I'm going to stop the share here. I am back. Again, apologize for having this be long, but hopefully you had some fun looking at some of those maps and some of those different results. And we will see you tomorrow. Thank you.